The sun was just beginning to rise over the small town, casting a warm glow on the quiet streets. Isabella, a bright-eyed 7-year-old, stood proudly in front of her tiny farm stand, arranging fresh fruit and vegetables with careful hands. She had spent the early morning helping her mother pick them from their backyard garden, eager to sell them to neighbors who always stopped by for the best produce in town. It was a simple life, but one filled with love, hard work, and dreams. Her mother, Elena, watched from the porch, a soft smile playing on her lips. She had always taught her daughter the value of resilience, of standing strong no matter what. But there were things Isabella didn't know. Things Elena had chosen to leave in the past. Years ago, before she became a mother, Elena had lived a very different life. As a highly trained Marine sniper, she had seen the darkest sides of the world, but she had left it all behind to raise her daughter in peace. At least, that's what she thought. The morning air was filled with the scent of fresh oranges and the sound of birds singing in the trees. Isabella's little stand, painted bright yellow, was a familiar sight in the town. People often stopped to chat, to buy a basket of tomatoes or a bundle of herbs. But today was different. Today, trouble was coming. A black SUV rolled up, its tires crunching against the dirt road. The windows were tinted so dark that no one could see inside. Isabella looked up, her innocent eyes curious but unafraid. She had seen cars like this before, but they usually sped past, never stopping. This time, it stopped. The doors swung open, and out stepped 3 men, rough-looking, dressed in dark clothing, their faces marked with the kind of confidence that came from knowing people feared them. Isabella's tiny hands gripped the edge of her stand as the tallest of the men walked forward. He glanced at the fresh produce, then smirked. "This your little business, Nina?" he asked, his voice smooth but dangerous. She nodded. "See, I sell fruits and vegetables," she said proudly. The man chuckled. Then, without warning, he reached out and knocked over a basket of ripe tomatoes. They tumbled onto the ground, rolling across the dirt. Isabella gasped, stepping back in shock. Elena's heart pounded as she watched from the house. Her fingers curled into fists. She knew exactly who these men were. The cartel had been pushing into their town, demanding money, taking what they wanted. She had hoped they would overlook something as small as her daughter's farm stand, but she had underestimated their greed. The second man grabbed a crate of oranges and threw it onto the road, crushing the fruit beneath his boots. "You gotta pay to sell around here," he said. "Nothing's free." Isabella's lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked up at them, confusion in her eyes. "But I just sell food," she whispered. The tallest man crouched down, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Not anymore," he said with a grin. "This stand is closed." From the porch, Elena took a deep breath, the weight of her past settling back onto her shoulders. The men had no idea who they were dealing with. They were about to find out. Elena stood frozen on the porch, her eyes narrowing as she watched the cartel men tear apart her daughter's stand. She felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to remain still. For Isabella's sake, she had to stay calm. She had left her old life behind, but the skills she had learned as a Marine sniper had never left her. They were always there, buried deep, ready for a moment like this. But the moment hadn't come yet. She watched as the tallest man kicked over a bucket of fresh peaches, sending them rolling like a mockery of her daughter's hard work. Isabella's face remained calm, but Elena knew her well enough to see the confusion in her eyes, the hurt in her heart. Her little girl had never seen this kind of cruelty before, and Elena vowed to herself that she would keep it that way. She couldn't let this be the day that Isabella lost her innocence. The second man was rummaging through the crates now, tossing aside whatever didn't look valuable to him. They didn't even seem to care about the damage they were causing. Elena could hear them laughing, their voices low but filled with menace. "This whole town belongs to us now," the second man said, his words carrying the weight of an unspoken threat. "You don't sell here without our say-so." The third man, shorter and with a face like a bulldog, stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching with a smug expression. He seemed to be the one calling the shots, but Elena knew better. The real leader was the tall one, the one who had spoken to Isabella. The other two were just muscle. Elena's mind raced. She had heard the rumors about the cartel moving into the area. She had hoped they were just that, rumors. But now, it was clear. These men weren't just passing through. They were claiming territory, staking a claim on this small town, and that included her daughter's farm stand. No one would be safe if these men had their way. Her fingers gripped the edge of the porch railing as she took a slow breath. She could feel the familiar weight of her old service rifle in her mind, the smooth wood of the stock, the cool metal of the barrel. Her training kicked in, and her heartbeat slowed. The first rule of engagement: stay calm, stay hidden, make your shot count. But this wasn't a battlefield. This wasn't some foreign land where she was a soldier among soldiers. This was her home. And these men were taking advantage of that. They didn't know who they were dealing with, but they would soon find out. As the men continued to destroy the stand, Isabella's voice rang out, louder now, but still filled with a child's innocence. "Please stop. My mama worked so hard on this," she pleaded, her voice breaking as she wiped away a tear. The tall man turned to look at her, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Hard work," he sneered. This is nothing. This is just a little girl's game." Isabella flinched at his words, her shoulders drooping. Elena felt her heart break at the sight, but she held her ground. Her daughter needed her strength now, more than ever. The men had gathered around, and it was becoming clear they weren't just interested in the produce. They wanted more than that. They wanted to send a message. Elena could see it in the way they stood, in the way they eyed Isabella, like she was nothing more than a nuisance. They weren't here for a simple protection racket. No, they were testing the waters, seeing how far they could push without facing resistance. And there it was. The moment. The tipping point. Elena's mind flashed back to her time in the Marines, to the sniper missions, to the cold nights spent alone in a hidden position, waiting. The precision required, the quiet breath, the calm of a steady hand. She could do this. She had done this before, and these men were about to learn the hard way that no one, not even the cartel, was safe when you underestimated a Marine sniper. Her fingers itched to reach for the old rifle that still sat in the corner of the house. It was a memento, a reminder of her past. She hadn't touched it since the day she made the decision to walk away from that life. But now, with her daughter in danger, all the rules she had set for herself began to blur. She needed to act. She couldn't wait any longer. But then something unexpected happened. The third man, the one who hadn't said much, started walking toward Isabella. He looked her up and down, sizing her up like she was a threat. He stopped just short of her, bending down so that his face was level with hers. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to run to her daughter, but she stayed still, watching through the window, holding her breath. "Hey, little girl," the man said, his voice suddenly softer, though the menace still lingered in his words. "You know, your mama's gotta pay, just like everyone else. You can't be out here selling without permission. You get it, right?" Isabella stared up at him, her small chest rising and falling with quick breaths. I don't have money," she said quietly. "I just want to sell my food. I'm not hurting anyone." The man smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that made your skin crawl. "Well, you'll learn, won't you?" he said, and then with a swift motion, he reached out and grabbed a handful of tomatoes, crushing them in his hand. The juice and pulp dripped from his fingers as he raised his eyes to meet hers. Elena could feel the pressure building inside her. She knew she had to make a choice. Her daughter was standing there, vulnerable. And these men were too close to her. Too close to the edge. Without thinking, Elena turned and walked toward the door. Her heart pounding with the weight of the decision she had just made. She wasn't going to wait any longer. She wasn't going to let them destroy her family's peace. As she reached for the door handle, a single thought echoed through her mind. They have no idea what's coming. Elena's hand was steady on the doctor handle, but her heart was a storm. Every inch of her body screamed for her to run, to scoop up Isabella and flee before things got worse. She could still hear the distant rumbling of the cartel men's laughter. See Isabella's small figure, trying her best to stand tall in front of the ruthless strangers. Her daughter's innocence hung in the air, a fragile thing ready to break at any moment. The sun was now higher, casting harsh shadows across the front yard. Elena didn't take a step forward, though. Instead, she hesitated, her fingers curling around the familiar wood of the door. What could she do? If she rushed in now, if she confronted them head-on, she risked making everything worse. She'd never wanted to drag Isabella back into her past, to reopen that door to danger, but the feeling of helplessness clawed at her. Every second she waited, those men were getting closer to destroying everything she had built. Through the window, she could still see Isabella. The little girl's face was pale, but there was something new in her eyes. Something Elena hadn't seen before. Fear, yes, but also something else. Defiance. Isabella might have been young, but she was tough. She had been raised with a sense of pride and grit that Elena had instilled in her since birth. Still, Elena knew better than anyone how quickly that kind of courage could be crushed by the harsh weight of the world. Her daughter had no idea what these men were capable of. She hadn't yet seen the side of humanity that didn't care for anything but power. The third man, the one who had been mostly silent, loomed over Isabella now, towering like a predator closing in on its prey. Elena watched as he bent down again, this time a little too close. She could see the shift in Isabella's posture, the small girl's shoulders hunching slightly as the man's foul breath washed over her. For a moment, Elena felt a wild urge to grab her rifle and fire, to silence the threat that was closing in on her child. But she knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would only bring more bloodshed, more destruction. From the corner of her eye, Elena noticed movement. A second SUV pulled up, this one sleek and black, but with an air of authority. The men froze for a moment, glancing over their shoulders. Elena didn't need to see who stepped out. The way the men straightened their backs, their attitudes shifting to something more careful, told her everything. Another figure had arrived. Someone higher up in the chain. Someone who ran things. The new man wasn't like the others. He wasn't young, and he didn't have the look of a muscle-bound enforcer. No, this man had an air of command around him, the kind of calm that only came from someone who had seen too much to be rattled. His eyes were sharp, scanning the scene. In an instant, his movements were precise, controlled. He walked toward the group of men, his gaze briefly meeting Elena's house before turning back to the wreckage of the stand. "What's going on here?" His voice was low but carried weight, an authority that immediately silenced the others. The tallest man, still holding the crushed tomatoes in his hand, stammered, something resembling fear crossing his face. "Boss, we're just what?" The new arrival cut him off, his gaze unwavering. "This is how we do business here now, huh?" His tone was calm, but it was the kind of calm that made people nervous. "We destroy things without asking questions?" The first man's confidence crumbled. "We were just trying to get the girl to understand," he mumbled. The boss's eyes lingered on Isabella for a moment, his gaze calculating. "This is just a child," he said, his voice taking on a strange, almost disappointed edge. "You're a grown man, picking on a kid? What are we, animals?" The second man shifted uncomfortably. "She wasn't paying up, boss. We had to make a point." The boss exhaled, the weight of the situation settling over him. "I don't care about your points. Get it together." We don't do business like this. Not here. Not now. Elena stood still, watching with bated breath. Was this her chance? Was the situation turning in their favor? The boss didn't seem to want a full confrontation. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this without bloodshed. But the relief was short-lived. The boss didn't take his eyes off the men, but his gaze flickered briefly to the house again. Elena's pulse spiked. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but she could feel his eyes on her. He knew she was there. He was assessing the situation now, considering what kind of woman could raise a child like Isabella. The kind of woman who might not be so easily intimidated. Get your stuff and leave. Now, the boss commanded, and with one last lingering glance at Isabella, he turned to walk away. The men, almost like children caught in a lie, scrambled to pick up the wreckage they'd caused, moving quickly and quietly to follow their leader. But as they began to walk toward their vehicles, Elena's heart still thudded painfully in her chest. The tension wasn't gone. It was still there, heavy in the air. Isabella was safe for now, but Elena knew better than to think this was over. The cartel had marked their territory, and they didn't leave things half-finished. The boss's car roared to life, the sound like a thunderclap in the quiet morning. The men followed, disappearing down the road, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Elena couldn't shake the sense that the real battle was just beginning. The cartel was still here, still holding the town in their grip. And now, they knew who she was. They knew her daughter. Elena stepped out onto the porch, her gaze never leaving the road as the last of the dust settled. Isabella was standing in the middle of the wreckage, her little hands gripping the edge of the overturned stand, staring at the broken produce strewn across the yard. Elena's heart broke a little more when she saw her daughter's face. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, but also something else. Something deeper. "Mom?" Isabella's voice was small, unsure. "What do we do now?" Elena walked toward her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We rebuild," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We rebuild, and we make sure they never forget who we are." As they stood together in the quiet aftermath, Elena couldn't shake the thought that this moment was the calm before the storm. The cartel might have left, but they had already set something in motion. And this was far from over.